Welcome to an episode of... I don't know what we're going to call this. We're just going to roll with it. It's going to be a little talk episode. I'm not really going to commit to anything. I'm not going to commit to saying anything. I'm just going to talk off the cuff. As you can see, I'm surrounded by my signage. Right now, I'm running for supervisor. Township supervisor. Oh, big office. Lots of important things to be done, important things to be said, potentially. The couple things that I'm running for, main reasons I'm running, are property rights. I'm running to keep taxes low. I will not vote yes on any tax increase. I will vote no on all tax hikes. And I am not necessarily satisfied with the current state of raises, salary raises. We recently had our tax collector. They had their salary raised, and there just wasn't a whole lot of pushback. I don't know. I'm not a fan of tax collectors anyways. Who would be, right? Who would be a fan of tax collectors? We used to tar and feather them during the revolution, and now it's seen as a easy way to get money. Could you imagine? If you made $9,000 in a month being the tax collector for a little township. $9,000 for 1 month's worth of work. Because all that work is done during the period of April. The month of April. I think for the most part it's April. March into April. Still, $9,000 a year for 1 month of work. And then you get a $600 stipend on top of that. I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. I think if you're going to collect taxes, you should probably just not collect them at all. Just don't collect the taxes. I mean, what are we going to do? Who's going to complain about that? Oh, the tax collector forgot to collect the taxes. No, they just didn't want to collect them. I'd vote for that. But there's some different things going on in the world these days. We're not the fledgling country that we once were. We're not the original America where tax collectors were tarred and feathered and we created a revolution. It was the Whiskey Rebellion of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Shays Rebellion in Massachusetts, the two rebellions that followed immediately after the creation of the nation and immediately after the nation started to levy taxes on its people. The same taxes, the same types of taxes that led the colonies into their own revolution that turned into the United States of America. And yet, here we stand. Here we are today. 90% of the taxes that we pay today were created after World War II. And then the other 10%, minus like a percent of that, but most of those came in between like the 1920s and World War II. A lot of it was FDR and his New Deal. The New Deal that was going to create a Social Security insurance program that was going to ensure that every American can retire and every American can live a comfortable life after they're done working at the age of like 62 or whatever it was back then. Now it's 67 and a half. We don't even have enough money to support the people that are on the system. It's gonna go broke in 2035. There's not enough people paying into it. There's not enough people dying early enough. I mean, realistically, the system was set up in a time whenever the life expectancy was low 70s. Now we have people living late 70s, early 80s. It's not atypical for people to live into their mid 80s. And then there's people drawing off the system that never paid into it, people drawing off the system early, people drawing off more than they've ever paid into it. But Social Security is supposed to be a self-sustaining system. You pay into it, you get back out of it. But the problem's been, not just the ones I mentioned, but the biggest issue with that whole system has been the government has been borrowing from it without ever paying it back. And the way it was set up, that they were supposed to pay it back. Right now, the price of silver is $32.57 per ounce. Getting back up there. Gold, getting up real high, hitting all-time highs these days. $2,917.40 per ounce. Just 5 years ago, it was $1,100. Those are significant gains. They say this is an indicator of inflation, people. These metals increasing in price. You know, right now, the price of copper, it was all-time highs last spring. Excuse me, I'm looking it up. Right now, it's $4.65 a pound. $4.65 a pound. Those are real goods that we need to make copper with. Your houses, they get copper wiring. Your electronics, TVs, cell phones, computers, they all use it. And that copper, it gets more expensive. This is an input. As your inputs increase in price, your outputs are going to increase in price. This is your inflation, people. You have an increase in your inputs, just like back in 2020, whenever we had a major increase in the price of lumber. By the way, today is 2/17/2025. It's President's Day. Happy President's Day. $4.65 a pound. I mean, that'd be nice if you held on to some copper. If you had a couple 5-gallon buckets sitting out in the garage somewhere, you could bring down to the scrap yard. You'd make a pretty penny off of that. Copper. But it's the inflation. The inflation is what's killing the economy right now. The inflation is what is driving this country into the ground slowly, stealing money from Americans' pockets, right from their bank accounts without them even realizing it. The money that you've been sitting on has been silently taxed by the Federal Reserve through inflation. And how do they do that, people? How do they create a silent tax through inflation? So you gotta understand, inflation is it's a compounding instrument. You know, they always aim for 2%. They're aiming for 2% inflation. That means it's healthy. We have a healthy economy if it's 2% inflation. So what's that mean? That your price of eggs, well, now they're like $8 a dozen. And that's for the cheap eggs. I remember whenever you'd go to the store and that was the price of the brown, cage-free, organic eggs, $8 a dozen. Now that's for your cheapo junk, off-the-shelf, bleached white, extra large, run-of-the-mill eggs. And just 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, those same eggs were like $2.50. $2.50. That's almost, people, a 400% increase on the price of eggs. And the Biden administration was trying to tell us just how great it was, just how great the economy was getting, how they improved it, how they did more work than anybody else ever did. And yet here we are. This is the economy that President Trump had to roll into and is going to attempt to fix. I'm not sure if the tariffs are going to help. They probably won't. It'll make things worse. But we got to do something to reduce this inflation. Part of it was all the funny money that came out of COVID, the trillions of dollars that was pumped into the M2. But realistically, a lot of it is credit and currency derivatives. Credit and currency derivatives. Those are your, whenever a bank goes to create a loan, say you want to buy a house, say you want to buy a car, and you don't have all the money up front. Say you put down a small down payment on whatever it is that you're buying. Well, whenever the bank loans whatever's left of that money, they're, in a sense, creating cash. So how are they creating cash? Whenever you buy goods, say you buy a car. This is a simple example. Say you buy a $30,000 car and you put a $5,000 down payment on it. So you took $5,000 real dollars and put that down on the car. So the bank has to forward the rest of the $25,000 in order to make up the balance of what the car costs. Well, that $25,000 just became real dollars. It didn't exist. It was money that didn't exist. And they loaned it into existence to you, which you used to buy a car. Now, that money that went to the dealership paid the salesman, paid the finance department. Most of the money ends up going to the manufacturer, where they use that money to build more cars, which they use to pay employees on the floor to build the cars and buy the materials from material suppliers, and which those suppliers pay their employees to mine the materials, refine the materials. Anyways, long story short, the money that you borrow turns into real fiscal money in the money supply. Whenever it's created, it's printed into existence for you to purchase something. Now, how do they do that? You say, oh, well, the bank would have to have some sort of backing. They'd have to have some sort of reserve to cover that, right? You'd think if a bank loans $1 million, they'd have to have $1 million in the bank to loan it out. And then they'd have $0 and they couldn't loan out any more money. But not true. That's not how that works. Unfortunately, the reserve rates of banks is much lower than what they're allowed to loan. So they call this the reserve ratio. And prior to 2020, mind you, that's a very key date in whenever everything started to change, was 2020. So if you go back to 2020, the reserve rate for banks was around 3%. So what does that mean? If they had $1 million in the bank that they could loan out, what's that, 97% on top of that? Whatever, 97% of 3 million, or more than that. So for 3%, basically if they want to loan out $1 million, well, what's 3% of $1 million? 30,000. So if a bank wanted to loan out $1 million, they would only have to have $30,000 on hand in order to loan out the full $1 million. So, and effectively, they're printing the other $970,000 into existence. Pretty interesting. But in 2020, this all changed. They got rid of the reserve ratio requirements. So what does the reserve ratio requirement, what does removing that do? It drops it to zero. So a bank no longer has to have any money in reserve in order to loan out new money. So what does that mean? What does this mean? What does everything mean? So this means inflation. Where are we at right now? We have, mind you, there's the M2, which is the actual real money in supply, the money in your savings account, the cash you have in your drawer, your wallet. It's the money you might have wrapped up in the stock market. The M2 is the real fiscal money supply. It is the actual money that is just floating around. It hasn't been spent. It's not tied up in a difficult investment account like a 401k. It is usable liquid cash. The total usable liquid cash is 21 trillion 700 billion, blah blah blah. Now, 21 trillion. Let's just call it simple, 21 trillion. I know we're underestimating at that value. We'll call it 22. 22 trillion. 22 trillion of M2. Now, there is credit and currency derivatives totaling of 723 trillion. Almost a quintillion. We're 75% of the way there, almost 75% of the way to a quintillion in credit and currency derivatives. This is money that the banks have loaned out that is unbacked, that is supposed to be paid back. And what do you pay loans back with? M2. So how does that make sense? You have 723 trillion M2, or 723 trillion credit and currency derivatives, and 21 trillion M2, 22 trillion M2. I mean, it looks more like this. Like that. Like this is the bottom. It's all the way up here. It's impossible. It's impossible. And this is the Keynesian economic system that we live in. So the Keynesian economic system is completely based off of inflation. And that's what we have to do. We have to print more money all the time. We have to constantly print money in order for anything to make sense. Because if it starts to roll back the other way, then people will just start hoarding their cash. And apparently that's not good for the economy. Any economist I've ever heard from has always stated that deflationary economy is the worst situation that you can get yourself into. But hey, I don't know. Maybe sometimes you need a great reset, because we're talking about numbers that are so big and so disproportionate. It's only as good as our belief system. So long as we believe that this system is functioning and that this system works and that the money that you hold has value, then that's the only thing that's really keeping it alive. Now, What can we learn from this, though, right? So this is all bad news, and I've just been spouting a real terrible bad news. But what does this mean? Like, what can you do? What can you do as a person, as an individual, as a business? What can somebody, something, an entity that has to function in this terrible topsy-turvy system that has been given to us? Well, really, it speaks for itself. One of the best ways that you can hedge yourself against any failures of this system is gold, silver, property, physical, tangible, unreplicatable assets. Unreplicatable assets. Things that God has created a finite amount of. Because let me tell you something, folks. God did not create cash. God did not create money. That is a human invention. The U.S. dollar is a human invention. And notice on the U.S. dollar it says Federal Reserve Note, all debts, public and private. It is a debt certificate. And what does the Bible say about debt? It's one of the worst sins you can get yourself into. One of the worst situations. It's basically like selling your soul. So, I think the big lesson to be learned out of all of that rant and rambling about money and taxes and etc. is that you got to hedge yourself by protecting yourself inside of tangible, unreplicatable assets. That could be even building a business, creating yourself a business that creates cash flow. That's a good hedge against inflation because as the money supply expands and things become more expensive, your goods and services are going to increase with those at the same rate. So you would then assume that you could gather even greater cash flows as the inflation increases. You're not going to become more wealthy, mind you. You will not become more wealthy. Do not mistake quantity for wealth. Because quantity of cash does not mean that you're wealthy. Nazi Germany learned that, or Weimar Germany learned that whenever they were bringing wheelbarrows full of cash down to the store, the market, to buy bread. The paper to silver ratio is 378 to 1, and the paper to gold ratio is 128 to 1. It's another good argument for why to invest or hedge inside of these assets. At 378 to 1, so what does that mean? What do these ratios mean? Paper to silver, paper to gold. So for every physical ounce that is in existence, that we know that's been mined, for every physical ounce, there are 378 people who have a paper certificate somewhere, usually on a futures trade, on a futures contract, stating that they own the same physical piece. 378 people lay claim to one physical ounce, yet only one person has that real physical ounce. 378 to 1. I kind of like to think about this as pent-up demand. So there's a demand for silver, and there's immediate, and there's pent-up. So immediate demand is somebody goes down to their coin shop, buys a silver coin, they buy an ounce of silver, take it home. The pent-up demand are your futures traders. They're the people who are trying to bet on the price fluctuations, and they're looking for minuscule price fluctuations. The issue with a futures contract is you have to take delivery of it if you allow it to expire. Well, unless you keep rolling it over, which is what they're doing. So as long as they keep on rolling it over and expecting silver to continue to stay going up, or whatever their trade might be. They might be trading long, they might be trading short, but at the end of the day, it's pent-up demand. So they're agreeing to purchase this ounce physically at some point. You have to have a physical ounce to cover it. So there's 378 contracts to one physical ounce. What does that leave for the contract holder whenever it expires? So the 378 people are going to be scrambling to find 1 ounce of silver? Well, what does that do? It'd be hard to tell, but at your most basic level math, one could assume that you could take the 378 and multiply that by your current price, because the current price would be your suppressed price with the pent-up demand purchased in paper contracts. Your paper contracts are what are outweighing your physical loads. So you've got an increased amount of paper over physical, which is artificially decreasing the price of silver. So that 378 would turn into real demand. So you could say that 378 people are looking for the same ounce, so therefore they would pay 378 times the price of what it is currently, which is $30 an ounce. We just said it was 32.57 an ounce. So we do 300 times 32.57. Is $9,771. Could you imagine $9,700 an ounce for a piece of silver? To be honest with you, I could imagine it happening. And you can look at gold the same way. Now, gold's ratio used to be higher until the price kept on going up. So the ratio has been closing that gap, and that's what happens. People are more keen to it now. So 128, because it's 128 to 1, times 2,900, $371,000 an ounce. Oh my gosh. Now see, I think, again, if this happens, if that were to happen, and you were holding physical, it wouldn't make you rich. What it would do is it would retain your current wealth. Because I think the only thing that would allow such a rush for silver and gold, the physical assets, would be if we had a severe catastrophe, a crisis, a currency crisis of the US dollar, which very well could be possible. Total US debt right now is $36 trillion. Current deficit $2 trillion and increasing. We're hoping to see that Doge, Elon Musk, might be able to turn it around, but unfortunately, if they don't touch entitlement programs, I just don't foresee any reduction of the deficit. Because if you look at a pie chart of everything the government spends money on, the biggest line item are your entitlement programs, your Medicare, your Medicaid, your general welfare programs. Leave Social Security alone because, like I said, it's supposed to be self-funded, dollar in, dollar out, but the House of Representatives has been using it as a slush fund. Better write your congressman and let them know. So that's why I'm running, you know. That's why I've got all these. I'm surrounded by my friends. throw my name. I'm just surrounded here by my own signs. We're getting ready to bring them out. It's petition season. Tomorrow's the first day to bring petitions live. Start knocking on people's doors. Say, hey, my name's Jacob Weibel. I oppose taxes. I'm in favor of property rights, and I want to be cautious about raising government employee salaries. If you agree with those three things, I would appreciate your signature on this petition for me to appear on the ballot. And I would appreciate your vote on Election Day. Lately, with the current office and the current administration, it seems like we could end up with some very favorable gun favorable gun laws, or lack of laws. The reflection of the Second Amendment as it was intended. We could very well see, and I think it would be great. We could see the deregulation of machine guns, or at least the unbanning of them after 1986. Because let's be honest here. Let's go down another rabbit hole. Let's talk guns. Why are we drawing the line at 1986? So anything made after 1986, machine gun wise, is banned. Why? What is the point of that? Why are we banning anything after 1986? It seems like a total waste of time, total waste of effort. I mean, come on. We had the same things then as we do now. If they were made in 1980, 1981, 82, whatever. We have the same machine guns now that we had then. The only difference is that they're banned because they were made after 1986. The only thing that does is that creates a false market. It creates a inflated demand, an inflated price for these antique machine guns. Now, I'm a fan of guns. I'm a major fan of guns. I've got videos on my channel here of me shooting different guns and taking them out to the range. And I think everybody should own a gun, unless if you're, a crazy nut, a felon, whatever. Certain people should be banned, but if you're a reasonable, well put together, if you're just a normal citizen, a law-abiding citizen, you should be allowed to have your Second Amendment right not be infringed. And that should be extended to machine guns. Sure, let's keep the ATF's regulations of them, right? So I think we can all acknowledge, sure, they're dangerous. Sure, they're scary. They can be scary. People don't know how to control them. They fire a lot of ammunition very quickly and can do a lot of damage. And in the hands of the wrong person, that could be a very, very horrific situation. It could turn into a horrific scene. So let's go ahead and say, let's allow the ATF to regulate them and make you wait a year so you can buy it, and you have to wait a year to take possession of it and go through their background check and their fingerprints and the FBI BS and all that stuff and pay their $200 tax and blah, 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 blah. But let's take away the ban after 1986. I don't see what that is protecting. I can see the protections that the other pieces of that puzzle do. The background check, the tax, all that stuff. It makes it so that way a crazy person shouldn't get one. I agree. Somebody who's mentally sound should get one. Someone who's not mentally sound should not be able to get one. I agree with that. Somebody who, You just don't want crazy freaking idiots getting a hold of machine guns because, let's be honest, they are very, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. You pull the trigger one time on that thing and it lets loose. We're talking weapons that fire up to 1,400 rounds a minute. A single-barreled weapon, 1,400 rounds a minute. Some people can't control that. Some people can't control themselves. And those certain people, they shouldn't be allowed to have them. But why are we drawing the line at 86 for all other law-abiding citizens? It doesn't make any sense. Like I said, all it does is drive up the price of these old guns well beyond what they should be able to be anyways. We're talking a Tommy gun is costing $30,000. Yet, the real price to manufacture one and to sell it with the markup and everything is going to be close to $1,000, maybe $1,200. So if you could buy a brand new one and still go through all the rigmarole that the ATF's going to make you go through, minus the 86 ban, you would only end up paying like $1,400 for one of these things. And you still have to wait a year, and the FBI would give you a background check and do your fingerprints and all that stuff, and they would know who owned what and where and when and yada, yada, yada. So if anything ever happened with one of them, they'd know exactly who to go to, where to go to, who has them. They'd know what doors to knock on. And really, I think the only people who would buy them would be interested collectors, people who, because you can't hunt with them. What are you going to do with that thing? It's fun. You just want to be able to do it. It's my Second Amendment right. I want to be able to go to the range and pull the trigger and the thing go, who cannot just smile with joy whenever that would feel so awesome. I've never shot one. I've always wanted to. Maybe I should have joined the military. But then, they don't get to keep them. And a lot of us, nothing wrong with military people, and I thank them for their service. But a lot of them end up having a lot of mental issues whenever they get out, and part of that could be the military's problem. They train these people to be killers. They train them to be soldiers, and they don't reintegrate them into society properly, and then they end up doing horrible things. And I don't think it's that's their fault. We as the nation, we raise them to be these killers and have them do these things, and that's kind of what happens. That's what happens if you spend $800 billion a year, billion with a B, on military funding. But, like a lot of it, I learned this from a Marine. I was friends with a Marine in college, and he told me so many stories, things that I didn't even know was going on. I mean, it was news to me and really eye-opening. But one of the biggest pieces, and he's one of the ones who taught me about how likely it is for service members to commit acts of violence or commit suicide, and a lot of it has to do with, like he's the one who said, raised to be killers and then not reintegrated properly. But he was telling me how, and this is probably a big portion where the budget's going for the military, that whenever they were in Iraq, they would track down these terrorist people who were operating, and they'd track them down and go to their house, put their family on the floor, put a gun to their back of their head and say, tell us where this person is. And they'd say, give me X amount of money. And then they had this big bag of cash. He said they'd ride around with a bag full of cash. Literally, just U.S. bills. And they'd say, like, I want $50,000. And they'd say, how about 20? And they'd give them $20,000. Or 25, or however much it was. And then they'd say, tell us where this guy is. And they'd say, all right, well, if you tell anybody, then we'll come back. We know where you live. And then they'd go to the next guy and do the same thing. And then the next guy and do the same thing until they got to the guy at the top. And then they'd kill that guy. But they were just bribing their way to find the top member of these terroristic cells. I wonder how effective that is. Got a lot of ducks out here. We're going to call this one Riverside Talks. Riverside Chat. Riverside Chatting. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. We're really kind of just settling in. I'm trying out some new things. I just had a radio show this morning, and it made me feel really excited about getting back on the microphone and talking on just kind of off the cuff. I'd like to have somebody here to talk with me, because this would be, I think, a little bit more interesting. But anyhow, we're going to bring this to a conclusion. It was a nice 40-minute run, and I hope you have a lovely President's Day. And you guys all take care. Thank you. All right. Bye.